Sounds on.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. So this morning we are, first off, I should introduce myself. So I'm Melissa. I work for Janome, Australia. I'm an educator. And today we are going to go through a little bit about in the hoop embroidery. So we have set up a 550E, Memoricraft 550E embroidery machine. And we're going to work with that one. What we're showing you though can be done on many of our embroidery machines that you may already have. So we're going to step you through a little coaster and construct it in the hoop. And while we do that, you'll be able to watch that happening, but we will also talk to you about a few different things embroidery machine related so that you can have some hints and tips to work with your embroidery machines. Now, everything that we go through today, you will be able to contact or go into your local retailer and they are able to provide you with all of the bits and pieces. So let's get started. I will change over to my screen so that you can see everything we're doing. Now we are going to work with a design that is imported from a USB stick. So to begin with, I've got my USB stick plugged into my machine and I am going to open up my embroidery from the USB. So there's a little file, a little icon that looks like a file with an arrow coming out. We're going to select that one. Then on this machine, we have the ability of selecting our built-in memory or our USB memory. So we need to select our USB because that's where I've got the design saved. And it's now showing for us all the little designs on this USB within this hoop. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, it says 1/3. So I've got a number of designs saved onto here and it will put all of the designs in their appropriate hoop sizes. So we're going to select my little coaster, which is right here. And the machine is giving me a little note to make sure that I don't have a hoop attached to my machine before I start. So my hoop attaches on this arm in here because this one is an embroidery only machine. You can't do any sewing. So my arm that attaches in here, it's making sure that I don't have my hoop attached. When I make sure that it isn't, I can confirm that and this arm is then going to move. So it's moving into position and the machine is then confirming for me what hoop I am using. So printed on all of our hoops, and you might just be able to see it in here at the minute, just down here, it lists off on this hoop, which hoop it is. So some of the hoops may attach at the top and it'll be up here marked, it might be on the side. It's in different locations, but every hoop has a name. So I've got the SQ14 hoop. And I've hooped this one with a cutaway stabilizer. So this one, we don't want to tear away. This will stay in the hoop behind the design forever. So I've got that in my hoop and that's going to be my foundation. So at the moment, I don't have anything else in there. And I'm just attaching that to my machine. So I've got a little two little parts here that I slide this little block back, push it over the little parts, and then it locks into position. So my hoop isn't going to come off. Now I've also got some bobbin fill in there and we're going to go through a bit more about bobbin fill in a minute. And I have threaded my machine with a very contrasting thread today for you. So if you were doing something like this at home, I would normally suggest to you to use neutral shades for in the hoop until you're decorating. But for today, so that you can see better on camera, my color is very extreme, okay? So I'm using a lovely hot pink. So I'm going to start out working with some of the design and then I'm going to talk about some other bits and pieces. So the very first step on my screen is trying to work out exactly where I'm up to. I've got a list down the bottom here, as well as when I scroll through my little icons, I can select my icon that gives me all of my thread colors so I can lay those out. Now within the hoop designs, you may have some colors that show very different to what the actual design is. Okay, so for this one, I've got this brown color. None of my design has brown, except it's just a placement line. So it's saved so that it gives me exact line. So I can lay those out if I would like. I can also, if I pop back to here, I can gray out all the rest of my design and just leave my outline of exactly what I'm stitching. So you can see here, this dark line is the color that is going to stitch currently. And you can see quite well in the background on the screen that there is all grayed out compared to what it was. So when you're actually sitting in front of the screen, that's a lot harder to see. You can see it a lot better on the camera at the minute. But the dark line is the first thing it's going to stitch. Now I'm going to lower my foot and allow that to start stitching. So I'm selecting my start button. And it's just doing a based area. And this based area is so that I know where to place my wadding. So I'm laying this down. This is a little coaster, as I said, just like this one. Okay. So it's completely made in the hoop. So this baseline is a part of the design, and it's just left. I'll just change over to my other camera so you can see the hoop. So you can see the hoop all there. All right. I can then take my piece of wadding, lay my piece of wadding down. I'm just using a polyester wadding here, but you could use anything you like. It's a good little one if you do lots of quilting as well. It's a good little one to keep those scraps from the sides of your quilt, because you can cut them up and use them in things like this. So we're laying that down. And for this step, I do like to pull up my bottom bobbin thread. So I'm just going to hold my top thread and I'm winding my needle down and just pulling my bobbin thread through. Oh. Let's have a look at what's happening here. I'm not sure. Let me just rethread my bobbin. There we go. The reason I like to pull this bobbin thread through, sometimes with the thickness of the wadding, the basting line may not pick up. So I like to, once I have my wadding in there, pick up my base lines and hold the two threads together, okay? Sometimes if you've ever had where you've based your, you might have solvi on top or wadding or things like this. If you've basted that into position and it hasn't quite caught, by holding your bobbin thread, that can help you for it to catch, okay? So we've got that there. I'll just grab that. Whoops. Doesn't want to play with me today. There we go. Let's just get my scissor. All right, so I've got my bobbin thread, I've got my top thread, I'm holding the two of those so my basting line stays in place. I just double check that I have covered my basting, so you can see down here, hence why I've put this into a really contrasty thread. And I can then lower my foot down, holding these two threads, just press start. And I don't pin any of this in place because it's only stitching around to hold this in place while we do our final stitch. I just kind of brush any movement within the wadding out whilst we're stitching. All right. Now we are going to take our center piece of fabric. So this little white bit that's in here, we're going to take this piece of fabric and we're going to lay it on top of here. Now it's a little bit difficult to work out if we're going to cover this corner. So if I change back to my screen here, we have an option on our embroidery machine screens that allows us to move the hoop to a position that benefits us better. So this little icon, when we select this icon, this is where we can baste. So if we were doing something like a towel or something where you needed some minky or something with solvi on top of it, you could come in and baste this in position. The other options we have at the bottom of here, we have to trace our area as the center, And then we have these 4 outer points where we've got little tiny, you might be able to see just the tiny little yellow triangles in the corner. These triangles, when we select them, are going to move the needle to that point of our hoop. So we want to move our hoop out so that we can see everything within that area. So I'm going to select my top right-hand corner, and you may have seen this hoop just move out just a fraction. So that then allows me, if I flick back to this one, that allows me to see better into my area. So if I was doing something like applique where I needed to make sure it covers my area properly, or if I was now trimming away, or I needed to be a lot more precise at this point, I can get this hoop to move forward. I'm then going to place that down, and I'm happy with where that is. So I'm going to flick back to my screen for you. When I select, so I'm just going to pop my hand here. When I select my cross, it takes me straight back to my stitch point. So now I'm ready to start sewing again. I can see that this is going to hold down my piece of fabric. And I will pop back to here. You can see my foot has now moved back into my embroidery area, and I'm ready to go. So I'm just going to lower my foot down on this machine and select my start. If you were unsure of what wadding or something like that, you could use a little bit of spray based for this, just to hold it in place, but it is only a small area, so it should be okay just to stick to your wadding for you. All right. So I trim my threads as I go. I don't like to have all threads in my way. So now what we're going to do, I'm just going to change back to my screen one more time to show you our next section. So our next section is actually to fill this area in the background. And we're going to allow for our machine to use a metallic thread for this step whilst I talk about a few other things. So I'm going to leave this machine stitching in the background. Now, because we're using a metallic thread, I do have a red tip needle in my machine, and I will talk about needles in just a second. Once I've got my machine threaded and started, I've got some machine needles here to show you, and hopefully you've got some needles that you can grab and have a look at while we do some talking. If not, it might be a good idea to pop to your Janome store and grab some Janome needles so that you can work with Janome needles in your Janome machines, okay? So we're just going to pop that in. So I've threaded my machine with the metallic. I have a red tip needle in my machine, and my design is going to start stitching out this quite dense decorative background. All right, so I'll just start that, and I will flick back to the other so we can do some talking. And I'm just going to stop before I talk and trim my thread again. There we go. All right, so that one will stitch in the background while we talk about some different bits and pieces to use with your embroidery machines. So with the embroidery machines, whoop, still getting used to where my cameras are all sitting and moving and so forth. All right, so we have a number of different things with the embroidery machines that can help you when you are embroidering. So probably the first thing that we maybe don't think about, but that is quite important, is what needle you're working with for what fabric and technique you're using. Then we also have several different bobbin cases depending on what bobbin fills you're using with your Janome machine. Then we have Janome bobbin fill. So that is actually works with our machines. You don't need to get anything done to your machine. You can work with Janome bobbin fill, the red dot bobbin case, and your machine will work straight from brand new out of the box. Then we have Janome specific bobbins. So if I shift these out of the way for the minute, we have a couple of different styles of bobbins. So most people have probably seen the clear plastic Janome bobbin. We have then got cherry blossom, so the pink ones and the blue ones. Now the reason I've brought these in today to show you is if you have an embroidery machine and a sewing machine, coloured bobbins are a great way for you to be able to work out what your bobbin fill is threaded onto. So if you have coloured bobbins, the coloured thread on your clear bobbins, sorry, then you know that that is a sewing thread. If you have your bobbin fill on, say, a pink bobbin, then you know that is embroidery bobbin fill. So you're not accidentally going to put the wrong bobbin fill into the bottom of your embroidery machine. Now, the bobbin fill is quite important when you're embroidering because you don't want that bottom thread to come through to the top. So like in a sewing machine where we prefer for our threads to meet at the middle, with an embroidery machine, we want that top thread to pull down to the back, okay? So depending again on the technique you're doing with the embroidery machine, some things it might be about a third, some things you'll have a lot more embroidery bobbin fill on the back of them because they're a larger area. So the 3 spools of bobbin fill you can see here are all the same weight. It is a 90 weight bobbin fill. It's just different quantities on the reel of thread. So contact your local Janome retailer and see what they've got in stock for you. Then you have the red bobbin case. So this little bobbin case here just has a tiny red marking. This bobbin case is what you will use with these bobbin fills. So anything Janome branded for the bobbin fill, the red bobbin case is tensioned to suit that one. With a lot of our newer embroidery machines, we now have this bobbin case that is a yellow. Okay, so this one is a higher tension. So if you choose to use a different bobbin fill, you may need to change over to this yellow bobbin case.
And when we're talking about yellow bobbin cases, the dot.
Yeah, when we're talking about the yellow bobbin case, we're talking about this actual dot. Some of you that might have sewing machines that have yellow bobbin cases, it doesn't mean that they're interchangeable. The embroidery ones have a yellow dot. Okay.
Some of the other,
the other ones I'm talking about that have yellow, this marking, this check marking, can still be yellow on other machines, but they're not an embroidery. Okay, so this dot is the part that you can tell that is embroidery. So your bobbin cases, your bobbins, and your bobbin fill are important for the bottom half of your embroidery. The other thing with making sure you're using Janome bobbins, they have in the center of them, they have a slight resin that will help to reduce the sound and the movement they're making within your embroidery machine. So if you feel that your bobbin is maybe making a little bit too much noise, just make sure you're using Janome bobbins, not just generic. Okay, so pop those to the side then as well.
Rewound bobbin.
Yep.
Whether Janome have some. I haven't got a packet handy that I can show.
No. Janome does have pre-wound bobbins. Yes, they are a clear bobbin. You can refill onto them. So if you do have a Janome bobbin a pre-wound bobbin that you would like to then reuse, you can. With your bobbins though, they are something that you want to make sure that you are checking the quality of your bobbin. So if you've had it for 10 years and you have maybe never changed your bobbins, it might be time to change your bobbins because they can get wear and tear. Of course, they're in the bottom of the machine and they're moving against other parts. So you can end up with wear and tear on them. So your bobbins are something that you do need to make sure you are checking on regularly. And if you are having stitch problems, it could be something as simple as the bobbin itself, not necessarily the thread or the needle or something else. So double check your bobbin as well. Okay. Now the next thing we have is the needles. Okay. So with the needles, Janome does have 3 different embroidery suggested needles. So we have a blue tip. I'm just trying to move that a little bit more in focus. We have a blue tip, a purple tip, and a red tip. Now the blue tip needle and the purple tip needle are the same style of needle, just that they are different sizes. So the blue tip is an 11 and the purple tip is a 14. So the reasons you would use your blue tip, so the finer needle, would be for maybe single layers of cotton or lighter fabric. So if you were doing, say, embroidery on a bridal veil, or you were doing some embroidery on a tutu, so those delicate styled fabrics, or up to a single layer of cotton fabric. That's good with your 11, okay? The 14 then is for your heavier fabrics. So if you do a lot of logos on maybe work shirts or towels or things that are a denser fabric or a thicker fabric, your purple tips are the one you would like for that. These ones are a 14, so they are going to be a heavier needle. They're going to have a bit more structure to them to deal with those heavier fabrics. Then your red tip needle is a 14 also, but it does have a slightly larger eye. So that is why today I'm working with the red tip while I have the metallic thread in there. So you can see on my hoop right now, this is all completely filled with the Janome metallic thread. And it's in like a teal color again, so that you can see the high contrast. But well, it's nearly completed, almost 1900 stitches with my red tip needle and my metallic thread. Okay, so they're your three. These are Janome exclusive needles as well. So if you don't have these needles and you do have a Janome embroidery machine, head into your local store, contact your local store and get them to send you. I always have like minimum 5 packets of these. When I get to 5 packets left on my shelf, I straight away replace so that I have a lot of my needles there. I do try to change out my needle, and I do suggest to change out your needle roughly I usually like to suggest every 6 to 8 hours or every project. So after I do a couple of these coasters, I will change. All right. And these little coasters are a great thing that you could do as a small gift. Christmas is coming up, so something like this is brilliant. Any kind of in the hoop is a brilliant little one for that. So we're going to flick back to, I'm just going to hold that thought over here and flick back to our screen. And it's now stopped because the embroidery machine understands where we are at and when it needs new thread and so forth. It's stopped for me and it's telling me on screen that it's ready for its next color. And because I've selected the little icon that grays out everything else, it's going to show me that it's just the branch that I now need to sew. So I can get I'm actually going to use a quilting thread for this one. So with I'll just pop this metallic over here.
Quilting thread on your embroidery machine?
Yeah, so with your embroidery machines, a lot of people might be used to just working with, I've popped down my little spool. We'll work with this one. That's right, I found one. So a lot of people will be used to you need to stick to embroidery thread because it's an embroidery machine. But you really can work with a number of different threads. And if you take care of what needles and where you're using it on your embroidery, that will give you a little bit more flexibility. So I'm going to take out my red tip at this point, and I'm going to pop in my purple. Okay, I don't need the larger eye, but I do need the strength. So sorry that my hands are in the way for this. It's not really an easy way. There we go. Just like that. So it just changes over. All of our needles have a flat back, so you can just pop the flat back towards the back of the, head it towards the foot. That's how you know. And it doesn't matter whether you've got a embroidery machine or a sewing machine or even our basic overlockers, they all have that flat back. So you can pop those all to the back. And I'm just going to use my needle threader and thread that needle. Now it brought my hoop in so that my needle threader didn't hit the edge of my hoop, and it will move it back oops, if I have that lifted, it will move it back. Shouldn't use my finger. Into position, so that now I am ready to go with this thread. So I've just, as I said, I've got a variegated cotton thread that I'm going to pop down, start stitching, and this is going to stitch out my branch. And I'm just going to trim this thread and start again. Now on my screen as well, you may have noticed this little tiny marking moving around the screen. So it's a little crosshair and it's showing us where exactly in our design we are. So if we did accidentally have a thread break, or we have threaded our machine with a reel of thread that we thought we would have enough to complete the area. What's happening? Oh, Peter's zooming in for you so you can see. So if you have had a thread run out, or you have run out of the thread has broken or something on the embroidery area, this little crosshair shows you where you're at, and then this sliding, or this bar at the bottom here that's counting for us currently, this is then showing us where we're at with our stitches. So we would then be able to, the machine would be stopped, we would be able to reverse back through to find where our stitch broke on screen, so that we could then start from that broken position and continue stitching again. So it doesn't mean if you do have a thread break or the thread runs out, it doesn't mean that you need to do away with that. You can continue to work with it. It's just reversing back to find where your thread broke and starting over again from that point. Okay, so you can very easily tell that here. You can also tell at the top of the screen whereabouts we are at time-wise. So we can see that we still have 19 minutes left in this particular design. And you can also see that I've slowed my machine down to 400 stitches. So some of our machines will go up to 800 to 1,000 stitches per minute in embroidery. Personally, I don't have my machine set to that speed. At the most, mine's normally set at about 600. If you have a slower machine, you are going to get a lot more accuracy. I know that we maybe want to get a lot more done, so we set them a lot faster. But if you have them set slightly slower, you are going to get more accuracy. We do have to remember that we are putting a whole heap of stitches onto the piece of fabric that maybe wasn't ready for that. So if you haven't quite stabilized properly, or if you are, like in this case, it has, I'll flick back to my here. In this case, we have the metallic thread showing underneath here, and then we have this branch and the little flowers that are going to go all over the top. So we need to make sure that we have supported everything, okay? So by slowing your machine down, you are allowing for that needle to go through the fabric properly and for it to connect with the bobbin fill and bring it all back up and balance lovely on top of the fabric. All right. Yeah. On some. Yeah. So on some machines, so if you are not 100% sure of where this little cross is, okay, on some machines, it doesn't automatically turn on. On the 400, 500 and 550, it is an automatic and it stays there on your screen. But if you have a combined embroidery sewing machine, it may not turn on straight away for you. It may be in a big circle dial that's here. The cross is in the middle. So you may need to activate and turn that on. Okay. And then if you have a slightly older machine, you may not have this function. This was something they brought through on the newer machines so that we can easily reference. With the prior machines, you had to watch where your needle was and then somewhat try and reference it on screen here somewhere. With the newer machines, they have brought this function in, so it's really, really easy to see and reference at one time. Okay. So with that setting of your speed, You can do that through your set menu as well. So on screen, you've got this little set button. In your set menu, you can adjust to set the machine speed. So this style of machine, because it is embroidery only, doesn't have a slider bar on the top here. If you have a sewing and embroidery machine, your slider bar may allow you to change it as you're actually working through the design. So if I flick back again to this one, if we were doing something with the metallic thread later on in our design, we may choose to start sewing at 600 stitches per minute. And then as we start getting towards the embroidery of the metallic, then we could reduce the speed down as well. So because you can change so many things with these machines, it does mean you are quite flexible with what you can do. Okay, so it's nearly finished the branch down the bottom. It's just working its way. Now the other thing with embroidery designs that you should make sure that you don't move away from is things like underlay. So you may have noticed as it was stitching, the embroidery needle moved all the way up the branch and then out each of the little branches and then back in. So that's creating an underlay. And that underlay acts like a foundation. So if you think about it, with embroidery, it needs to have a really good foundation in order for everything to stitch on top of. So if we have picked the correct stabilizer, if we have an embroidery design that lays a good amount of underlay underneath of it, then you're not going to end up with pulling, puckering, shrinking, or anything like that. Okay, we'll hold that thought because I've got a little bit more to go into about that. And I'll trim this thread so that we can keep this embroidery machine stitching. Now I always cut my thread at the top and pull it through because it's like a hair. You don't want to pull all of the bits back up through the machine. Now I want to show you something else. So this particular design has, I'll grab my little sample for you. This particular design, we've stitched out the background. We've also stitched out the branch. Now we've got to this point where it has something in there that we maybe don't want to embroider. So there are a couple of ways that you can get past this and not have to embroider everything the machine is telling you. So the first thing you could do is, as I was mentioning before, we've got the plus and the minus, so we can advance or we can return back through our design. So we could sit here and plus, 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 plus through every single stitch. The machine will start advancing through single stitches, 10 stitches, 100 stitches, and then 1,000 stitches. So that can be quite good. However, if we know we want to advance through the entire color, so for some reason we don't want this here to stitch, or you may not want the little green sections of the design to stitch. Okay, in this case, we're going to advance past this one. So you have the option. Now this may be located slightly differently in different positions on your screen. Some of you might have a little bit of a marking over here with an arrow. This one is your jog forward and backward in the whole color. So I'm going to advance the whole color straight onto my flowers. So as simple as that, I have moved on from one part of my design to the next part of my design without having to worry about stitching it or sitting here for a while guessing when am I at that next color or when do I need to return. So now that I have my flowers, I can pop my thread. Now this time, so far we've used a metallic thread, a cotton thread. Now we're going to use a polyester. So this one is a Janome polyester. It's just a pale, again, I'm trying to go with so many colors to contrast on the screen there. Okay, now I can do that. So now I've got that one threaded and I can lower my foot and I can start to stitch. Now, as I was saying, with the foundation for your embroidery or the underlay for your embroidery, if you have a design that doesn't have a good amount of underlay, it would be like pouring a slab for a house without Rio, okay? None of us are just going to get a concrete truck to turn up and pop the concrete on the ground. we need to make sure that we have a really good structure for our house to sit on top of. So embroidery is the exact same. You need to have a really lovely foundation, whether that be the stabilizer, the underlay of the stitching. Those two things will help you get a really lovely result where your design then looks like it's sitting nice and flush on top of your work. It's not disappearing, it's not shrinking in, unless that's the look of the actual design, of course, but it's then going to give you a really lovely result. Okay. I had another great thing I was going to tell you as well when I started. Let me just quickly reference my screen. Oh, that was the other thing. So I have left my 14 needle in there because now, oops, I've left my 14 needle in there because now I'm going through, at certain points, the design is going to stitch over this thread, plus over, and here's one I prepared earlier, plus over the stabilizer, the wadding, and the fabric. Okay, so I'm not going to change out my needle again now until the next design that I choose to put into my machine. And sometimes you can keep a little needle holder nearby. If you are using your machine regularly, then you may know exactly how long between each time you've used your needle. But sometimes if you're taking it in and out, then you could make a little note that it was only used for 2 minutes and therefore you can reuse. All right. Oh, so if I pop back to needles while this finishes the last couple of flowers, if I pop back to the needles, I've blue tacked onto my paper here 2 styles of needle, and I'm trying to get the best angle for you. Can't quite grab it. The best thing for you to do is make sure that you have got some red tip, blue tip, or purple tip, and then a standard needle. Now, when you take these needles, I'll slide some, grab them off of this since I can't use them.
Yep.
Here's a red. Here's a red I prepared earlier. If you take the 2 needles, they have a flat back and then they have a curved front. Okay, so if you take the flat backs pointing up to the ceiling, and as you look at the back of them down toward the eye, so you can see down toward the eye here, if you take a look at the backs of these needles, this is where they are slightly different. Okay, so on a standard needle, it comes down quite, and the easiest thing is take your finger and run your finger down the back. On the embroidery needles, you can see there's like a little shield. So that's actually looking after the thread that's coming through the needle as it enters the fabric to collect that bobbin thread. Okay, on a standard sewing machine needle, it's not doing quite the same amount of movement and work, so it doesn't have the little shield that we need for the embroidery. So with these embroidery ones, right before that eye, on the back of the needle, you've got this little protective area that increases the eye depth and allows for the thread to be safely inserted into the fabric for you. Okay, I've gone a little bit technical, I know, but it's good for you to know, and that's it. That's why it's important that you do use the Janome embroidery needles in your Janome embroidery machine. Okay.
And where are the Janome embroidery needles available?
You can get the Janome embroidery needles, all of them, the blue tip, the purple tip, and the red tip, from your local Janome retailer. Okay.
Only place you can get them? Yeah,
they are exclusive to Janome retailers, so you do need to buy them from them. They're made exclusively for Janome, yes. Yeah, and they are actually blue on the top, purple, and red, conveniently. Okay. All right, so it's just finishing off the last couple of flowers, these larger flowers. Now, with this design, after the session today, you can contact your local retailer or the retailer that has invited you to the sessions, given you the registration. They will have the instructions to do this little coaster. So you will be able to download the embroidery designs, print out the step-by-step, and follow through to create your own coaster in the hoop. And I think I'm just going to let this last flower stitch out, and then I've got some examples of other in the hoop projects that I would like to show you, because there is a lot of in the hoop you can do, and it is quite probably in more recent years it is quite a fun thing to do. It's a really easy thing to do. You can incorporate still your sewing machine with some things, and that's some of the things I'm going to show you. I feel like there was a lot less flowers than I thought here. We're nearly there. Okay, let's change over, and I'll quickly, So we'll quickly chat about this particular little one while this finishes what I thought was the last flower. So this one here, this is actually a hoop bag that we have designed. So it suits the larger embroidery only machine hoops, but the design you can see on the front are little jars that are appliques in the hoop. And instead of just the standard fabric, we've incorporated the plastic vinyl. You can see it shimmering in the camera there. So the plastic was actually placed over the fabric in at the point of stitching. So now it looks like a little glass jar. So we've put some little cotton reel and scissor fabrics into there, but you could put some little bugs and make it look like bug jars. There's lots of different little things you can do with something like that one. Another option that we have of the same design is something like this one. So on the left-hand side, we've got some little confetti fabric that we've popped behind some netting. The middle one, the middle jar has just got some fabric in there, and the right-hand end jar looks like a little thread jar, and it's got the plastic over it again, but we've popped in the little threads before we've put the plastic down. So now when you move it, all of the thread and the confetti in the end will start moving. The other one, before Peter takes that away, put that back please. The other one you can see on there, the dress model, that has an embossing fill on it that you can create using Digitizer. So we have some great functions in Digitizer that allow you to do things such as that embossing. All right, so we'll pop back to this, this one for a second while I rethread, just for the second last of this center. So we've just got the little color in the middle of the flowers here to do. And just popping, so I've trimmed that thread at the top. I pull that through and rethread, rethread. Now, some of your machines, you may also notice when you are threading, you do have, and more so the newer ones, new threading pretensioner, so that we can, got to do less talking and more concentrating. So that we can, why isn't that coming through? Oh, I tangled my thread around my needle, sorry. There we go. No. It's getting caught on my, go slower, Melissa.
Did you lock the machine?
Thank you. Foot down.
That's got your shoes.
Oops, I double pressed. We'll get there in a second. Oh, lower the foot. I think it's the actual thread, to be honest. There we go. Lift that, lift that. Okay. All right, so this is going to continue to stitch again. And do we have another sample there, Peter?
What would you like to say?
The frog. Yeah, there we go. So this is another little in the hoop that we've created with Digitizer. And it was a standalone embroidery design. So we just had the little frog as an embroidery that we could have put onto a t-shirt or anything like that. And we have taken that into Digitizer and added some borders to embroider the whole thing out in the hoop, so we could turn it through, and there's a little area, I think at the bottom, with a slip stitch that we've just closed that close. Yeah, there we go. So that is actually a little game that we have that is also incorporating embroidery, quilting, and sewing. And it is a leapfrog game. So at the moment you can see three of the pads, as Peter keeps moving them. So the numbers are appliqued within the hoop, as well as the big flower, or the orange with the black and the red with the black. All of that is created within the hoop. Then we have appliqued them down to the background that has the lily pads and all the quilting on it. So we've incorporated a bit of everything: applique in the hoop, embroidery in the hoop, and then taken it to the sewing machine and added it to the sewing machine. Along with then, so you take the little frog game and you throw it onto there, and of course you do your little hopscotch up the numbers and skip the one the frog's on. Okay, so that's another idea for something that you could do with your embroidery machine. And while what else have we got in there?
Oh my God.
So these ones here are more like what we're doing exactly now. So this one has some stippling in the background. Then it's got the coffee embroidery, or it might have actually been the other way around. Then the stippling, and then we've added the top and turned it through, or added the back, sorry. So we added the back, which is then on top when you're embroidering, and then turned it through. And then the other one we have here is the same method, slightly different quilting in the background, and we've added a name. And then it's also adding the backing and stitching it on. Okay.
Got a broken thread, Melissa.
It was actually finished.
Oh, okay.
So my machine has now, oh, everyone's looking at the blank wall. Okay. If I jump back to my machine now, I've got my second last color, which is just a really quick part on the bottom of the three little flower buds. So it's just the flower buds showing the bottom. And the embroidery machines, much like most of the sewing machines, are going to just thread in the exact same method as your sewing machines. Okay, so if you haven't had an embroidery machine, or if you haven't had a sewing machine and you have one or the other, your machines, whether it be either or, are going to give you the threading path is going to be the same for you. Okay, so I'm just going to unlock my machine again.
There's a question there. Well,
yep.
Where do we get the leapfrog game from?
The leapfrog game, yeah. You can, there's a couple of different ways you can get that one. You can get it downloaded from the Janome Australia website under the tab of inspiration. And then there is a section called Create Your World. So you can go into there and you can download it. Your local retailer will also have that. So you can contact them and they can send it to you. Some of them even print them for you. So you could contact them and find out what they have. We have got a number of different ways that we provide you with embroideries and sewing projects every single month. So if you haven't already, you can subscribe to Janome Australia's newsletter, where every month you get your bonus embroideries and you get your accessory information, free projects, all these kind of things. All right. Now, on my screen, I'm going to show you here. It's now going to do a little placement line. So we're nearly to the end of our embroidery. It's doing our little placement line for us. So I'm going to leave on this high contrast thread again. Normally I would change back to somewhat similar threads. I would have changed to a white, but only for the purpose of today, we're doing a bright color. And I'm lowering that down and going to start embroidering. Okay, I'll change back to my other camera. So what this is now doing is it is putting in place our positioning lines for our placement of our borders. Didn't quite grab that.
Oh, good. Everyone can see that.
Oh,
We're not perfect.
no. It's folded my thread back in at the minute. So I'll just stop that.
Problems.
And I'm just going to trim up the edge of my fabric line. There we go. And start again. So you might like, sometimes depending on what I'm doing, I might tape that into position. Just make sure you only use like a, is it washi? However you say, the paper tape.
Washi tape.
Washi tape. You don't want to use a very sticky tape.
The washi tape.
Yeah, so the paper tape is a really good one. If you use a sticky tape, you will then run the risk of it kind of getting stuck in your needle. So you don't necessarily want that. And if you do use something with a sticky medium, so you might have a sticky stabilizer in your hoop, or you might need to use a sticky tape for some reason. So if you're doing that, you can use the anti-glue organ needle, which we also sell.
Yep.
Okay.
Are we doing the construction now of this?
Yes.
Yep. Double outfit.
Yes. So now what we're up to is adding in these borders. Okay. So it's going to actually start stitching and adding these borders. But first it's going to put in my placement line. So this one here is my line that I'm going to line my fabric up with. And I've just got to locate where I've put my strip. Here they are here. Are they?
That should be back. Yep.
What's it doing here? Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take my blue strip and I'm going to lay this down and line it up. Now it's probably a little bit difficult for you to see. I'm lining up my raw edge with that stitched line. So I'm just going to line that up like that. Okay, lower that down and then start to sew across.
So you're just gently holding that.
I'm just gently holding this in place. Again, you could tape it down, especially if you are really fast, if you want to do this flat out. Because I slow my machine down, I just tend to hold that in position. And then we're going to do the same with the opposite side. I'm going to lift my foot. This one you can see a little easier. I'll just bring my hoop forward.
That's good.
So you can see, here's my stitched line. Here's where I'm going to line up my fabric. Okay. And lower my foot down. Oops. And start to sew again. Sorry, yes, I used the hoop movement icon to get my hoop to move out of the way so that I could work with what was on screen. Then I'm going to just quickly use that hoop movement again so that I can press these ones open. So rather than having to take my hoop off every time, I can just now I've just got like a little tool with a flat bottom. You might have a hair marker or something like that. Just gently start to pop that away like that. Do the same on this side, like that. And you could use scraps. I think the instructions give you the minimum size that you need to use for this, but you could use scrap pieces. And we're going to do the exact same on the others. I pressed my hoop back before I got there. So now the left and the right. And normally you would have a lot more light in here. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. We've turned our light off purely for the purpose of the cameras today.
The lights are so bright.
Yeah, the lights in the bed of the machine here was so bright that you couldn't quite see what we were embroidering. So we've just turned those off just for today to do this little design. Now to move across to do the last border, and we can place that in, lay that down, go again. And it will tend to bounce a little because we are working with the wadding behind it as well. And then we will flip these ones open. And our last section is to place our backing on top. So we'll lift that up and I'll bring that all the way forward again to make sure I can press these open. So you can see there the stitch line that it's created. And this one has also reduced the stitch length of that stitch line, more like to if you were sewing with it on a sewing machine. Okay. Whereas the other lines prior were all basting lines. Okay, so we've got all of that there. Now we're going to pop our backing on top. And the backing is the same size as the wadding. So you just line up the backing and the wadding together, and that's covering everything in. And lower the foot down and sew around. Now, if I just show you back to the screen quickly, you can see the little crosshair is starting here, and it's going to work its way up and around and leave a gap so that we can turn that through. If we didn't leave a gap, we wouldn't then be able to turn it through. Oh, while that stitches, I can talk. We wouldn't be able to turn it through. And then once we've turned it through, we can just sew. We could either sew it with the sewing machine or take a sewing machine needle, a hand sewing needle, and slip stitch that closed. So this is then the last step. I like to make sure that it's not moving the fabric around. Just kind of massage it away a little bit if it is. And then once it gets to the end here, we're ready to remove it from the hoop. So we can take it out of the hoop. We can remove the hoop and the backing, and then we can trim away. Now, the cutaway is exactly as it says, cutaway. You don't need to sit and pluck it out of all of these areas. It can stay in there. It can wash. It will hold together really well. So you then just take it, cut it back to the 1/4 inch, and then turn it through. Okay, and you'll end up with a lovely little coaster like this one. All right. So I'll change back to here. So we thank you for attending today, and we hope that you have learnt some bits and pieces about your embroidery machines and features and functions that the Janome embroidery machines offer to you, as well as the importance of using the Janome equipment with the machines.
And how easy it is to do the
and how easy it is to create in the hoop projects, how quick and easy it is. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at any of the next sessions this afternoon or tomorrow. Have a great day, and thank you from Janome Australia.